Hello, bonjour, konnichiwa, marhaba, yakwe, and hola. Welcome to our virtual city life recap, where you're going to have the opportunity to learn from 19 different city departments on how they work and operate. You're going to have the opportunity to also see how you can get connected and make a difference within our community. So, if you're interested in also participating in an in-person event, we offer them in fall and also in the spring. You can find us at www.cityofdubuque.org/citylife. So without further ado, let's begin.
And I've been the director here for the Human Rights Department for 22 years, so quite a while. The first about 10 of those years, I was doing enforcement work, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And then the rest of the time, we've been moving towards some more proactive work. So that sort of takes me to, what is it that a human rights department does, right? So historically, our department and most departments across the nation that are called human rights or civil rights or sometimes human relations have basically a civil rights ordinance that grew out of the 1960s civil rights movement that prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, places of public accommodation. And our agencies exist to enforce those laws. So that has very much been, that was what the focus was exclusively for the first 10 years or so when I was here. So I was spending my time investigating cases. And I'd like to draw the distinction between that, which I call civil rights, and human rights, which I think of as civil rights are things that are laid down in law and can be enforced in court. Human rights are things that a lot of us might have some moral agreement around, that people are, should have basic human needs met, have housing, shelter, food, healthcare, those kinds of things. But of course, in a democracy, there's lots of disagreement about how we get there. And so that's sort of how I distinguish between those two things. And as we currently operate, what our department's been moving towards, and what a lot of departments are, is more towards equity and inclusion. So looking at bigger social issues where we have disparities in major life outcomes based on a variety of reasons, and how do we start addressing those and get to a society where people are better able to thrive, and doing all of that, of course, within the context of democracy, which means there's got to be a lot of community and resident engagement in order to make that real. So that's where we are now. And this is the way I like to think about it, is this difference between compliance and commitment. And we're really trying to do both, with compliance being the floor and what we would prefer not to do, which is have to get there through force and setting legal limits and being reactive. Harm is usually already done if we're into the enforcement side. One person wins, or one side wins, one side loses, and it doesn't necessarily solve problems moving forward into the future. The commitment side is about broadening that up to possibilities, trying to be more proactive, more collaborative. How do we create solutions together that are better for the community overall? So that is our sort of frame of mind in the work that we do. So the first service that we offer in the department is around discrimination complaint intake and bias incident response. And so what I mean by that is the discrimination complaints are things that are specifically covered under our civil rights law, and I'll go through those details in a little more detail. Bias incident response is a little different. That's situations where somebody might report something to the police department, or sometimes it comes to us first, where you hear people talk about hate crimes, and they may or may not rise to the hate crime level, because hate crimes are very specific. There's specific types of crimes, but sometimes we have things that happen that might not be at that level, but that are still indicative of some kind of bias. And so then we have a team internally from the police, city manager's office, neighborhood development, our department, multicultural center, and we get together and say, okay, what are some of the things that we can do to try to address this? And if there's a specific target, a person that's been targeted, then we'll do some outreach and support with them. most of what we see is things more like graffiti. You know, somebody writes racial slurs or slurs against someone based on their sexual orientation on public property, and those kinds of things that get reported to the police and oftentimes don't go anywhere enforcement wise, because often there isn't any, no one has any idea who actually did it. But then our commission might take a look at it and decide whether they want to make a statement in the paper or do some educating around, you know, why this is a problem to have this happening in a community and those kinds of things. This is what our local non-discrimination law is. So you have federal civil rights laws, state civil rights laws, and then we have ours locally. Our law makes it illegal to discriminate in employment, housing, a place of public accommodation, which is really just any business where a member of the public might go to get goods or services. So it can be a doctor's office, it can be a restaurant, a retail store, a hotel, education or credit, based on any of these characteristics. And so a couple of things to note about this is that when you get to, a lot of times people are confused about the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. So sexual orientation is about who people are attracted to. Are you attracted to people of the same sex, a different sex, both sexes? Gender identity is more internal and how you identify as a person. Do you see yourself as more masculine, more feminine, or somewhere along a continuum? Family status is something that's really specific, and that only applies in housing, and it makes it illegal to deny housing to someone because they have children under 18 living with them, but there are exceptions for senior housing. So that one's a little, there are a lot of details around what qualifies as senior housing. And then retaliation means that you can't discriminate against someone because they either brought a discrimination claim themselves in the past, or they were a witness for someone else in a claim, or somehow involved in a discrimination claim. So in terms of, you know, how residents can be of assistance in this area of what we do, one of the biggest things is reporting. Reporting when incidents happen to you, to someone you know, or if you witness something. And there's a way on our webpage, and the website is here. It's just cityofdubuque.org/human rights. And you can report a concern. And that lets you put in a report. You don't have to disclose who you are. You can put in something anonymously if you want to. It helps us to have a sense of what's happening out in the community. And then the other piece is intervening. And when I say intervening, I'm really talking about providing support to someone if they are being harassed or discriminated against, or having conversations with people about things they might say or do that you might see as discriminatory, and talking through with them, what were you thinking when this happened, or when you took this action, and help me understand this. So I'm a big proponent of dialogue and really trying to understand what's happening in a situation between people, rather than allowing it to escalate. And then, of course, you may join the Human Rights Commission. So we have a commission of 9 members. They're all appointed by the City Council. And currently, we have one slot that is open for appointment on Monday night at Monday night's council meeting, and then we'll be at the full 9 commissioners. But you can put in an application at any time. The clerk will keep it for a year. So if someone resigns for some reason and there's an opening, then the clerk would pull that application up and let you know that there's an opening. And our Human Rights Commission, they do a goal setting every year, and they have theirs coming up on the 10th of May, actually, and they're going to talk about what kinds of things they want to prioritize that they think are important for the community in terms of education, raising awareness, or any policy issues they might want to suggest to the City Council. And then we also have something called the Dubuque Community Police Relations Committee. And so that is, in the past year, especially with Black Lives Matter and all the things that have been happening, there's been a lot of conversation about citizen oversight boards for police departments. And that is what our DCPRC sort of functions as. So this was created between the local NAACP and the city of Dubuque, and there's a memorandum of agreement, and it establishes this committee. The committee is made up of residents that are appointed by the city council, the Human Rights Commission, the NAACP, and then it also has representation from our police department's protective association, their union. And what this group can do is hear complaints about the police that are based on any of those characteristics that are protected under our civil rights law. So they can hold a hearing and then make recommendations to the police chief based on whatever they find during the hearing. It's designed to be more like an alternative dispute option rather than going through the civil rights enforcement process. It's up to the person who has the complaint if they want to choose the civil rights enforcement process, this committee, or do both of them, because they can do both at the same time if they'd like to. Then the second big area of our work is all around this bigger issue of advancing equity and inclusion. And so, we have these, this is a graphic that I think describes pretty well what we mean by equality versus equity. So in the first one, you're treating everyone equally, everyone's getting the same support, and obviously some people can see the game and some people can't. In the second one, you're giving some people more supports based on what they need to be able to see the game. But the ideal and what we're really working for is to be able to remove those supports and take the barrier, in this case, the fence you can't see through, out of the way so that people can succeed on their own. So we're really looking at that. To us is what equity means. It frees people up for their potential, takes the barriers out. And within the city organization, what we have is we've been asked to work with each department on creating an equity plan for their department. And those equity plans are around 4 basic goal areas. So one is about recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce within our organization, so people who work for the city. One is about looking at how we deliver our services and what are the outcomes of those services, programs, policies that we may have, and are those outcomes equitable, or are certain groups benefiting more or being harmed more than other groups. We have a grant contract piece, and that's where the city gives out funding, grant funding to a variety of different organizations in the community. And this is where we offer support to partners if they want to think about ways. We ask them to tell us how they're going to use their city funding to help to advance equity in the community. And then we will help with training or coaching or talking things through in terms of what they're doing and how that may have an equity impact. And then community engagement. Because the biggest challenge that I see sometimes is that as people are working on equity, a lot of times we're substituting our job about what people need or what's going to solve their problem instead of working with the people who are most impacted and figuring out together what might be the best solutions. So our goal is to have our departments, when particular programs are being done or policies are being introduced, that they're asking themselves a set of questions. They're starting with data and saying, okay, what does the data tell us about this issue? They're disaggregating that data. So they're looking at, is it impacting men and women differently? Is it impacting people of a variety of races differently? Is it impacting someone has people who have disabilities differently? Looking at that and then asking, okay, how are we going to try to address those differences? Having some measures in place to see what the outcomes are as we go along, and making sure that as we're deciding what our strategy is or how we want to address it, we're involving the community members who are being the most impacted as part of that. So we better understand what they see as the barriers that are getting in the way that we might be able to work with. And so that's the work that we do with departments. And it also includes some training for staff and those kinds of things. And then we, as each department gives us their equity plans, and then we also have certain city plans that have been done with a lot of community engagement. So we have a comprehensive plan called Imagine Dubuque. We just completed a poverty reduction plan, and we also have to do something every 5 years called a consolidated plan, which looks at housing issues in the community. And as part of that, we have to do an analysis of impediments to fair housing. So what kinds of things are preventing people from accessing the housing that they need? So all of those things were taken into account, and our department put together a 2021 to 2023 equity plan for the organization as a whole. And that has multiple projects in it. Some of them our department's involved in, other departments are doing on their own. There are some that Collins and Temwa and I have been particularly heavily involved with. One is working with a group of school representatives, police officers who are in our school resource officer program, and community members to look at what is the impact of having the school resource officers in the schools, positive and negative, and what sorts of recommendations could be made to maximize positive impacts, minimize negative impacts, with a particular focus on students of color, and whether we have disparities specifically impacting our students of color. We also have a group that's looking at the Dubuque Community Police Relations Committee and asking the question. So this committee has been in place since 1992 or 3, and it was updated in 2016, but there weren't a lot of substantive changes to it. And so the question is it up to date? Should there be some stronger authority within that committee? Should it be operating in different ways? And looking at how are other committees structured across the United States that we might look at as comparisons. Supporting minority-owned businesses, making sure that they're getting the information about like the support that's out there because of COVID, things like that, supports that are available through the Small Business Association here in town to get people up and started with their businesses. A lot of work around the COVID vaccine. So we've been hosting online Zoom conversations with physicians and community members, having people ask questions of the physicians about the vaccine, kind of work through, things that might be causing people concern, why they might be hesitant to get the vaccine, and getting those questions answered. And also then making sure that people know that it doesn't cost anything. You can walk in, we have walk-in clinics now. You're eligible as long as you're over 16. Now, if you're 16 to 18, you can only get Pfizer, but 18 and up, you can get all 3 that are available. You don't have to have a pre-existing condition or be over a certain age. Those limitations have all been removed. And then we're working on a municipal careers path program with the school district. So the idea being that we can start bringing high school students in and getting them exposure to the variety of jobs that we have with the city, because we have tons of different careers that sometimes people don't think about that might align with their interests. And so we're trying to get that program up and running. And then we're doing a big project. This is a city council priority on equitable fine and fee reform. And that's all about looking at who's being most impacted by fines and fees. And, we know that there are certain situations where if someone gets a certain type of ticket or fine and financially they can't pay it, it may have sort of these cascading effects that can actually dig them deeper and deeper. So if you could get, if there's any kind of ticket that's related to your driving, your license, it might be that it was for a small fender bender, and you get a fine, but you don't have the money to pay the fine, then it goes to court and the court costs get added onto that. If you, you don't pay those, then they, keeps accruing. And eventually, because of the type of violation, it can trigger a Department of Transportation intervening and limiting your access to your license. And then for a lot of people, they'll keep driving because they're trying to get to work. And then eventually it just keeps getting worse and worse. And so we're trying to look at what are the things that our residents are having the most problems with, and what are some creative ways that we can address that so we can still get compliance with the law while also providing alternatives. So we're looking at things like volunteerism, participating in maybe development courses that help with career opportunities, things that can be of benefit and still meet our end goal of getting the compliance with the ordinance as well. So those are all things that group is considering. And so this is really, I'm up to the end, just a couple of things. This first website link is how to find out about city employment. So we have lots of jobs in different areas. There are all sorts of things that are out there. So we don't have any openings in our office right now, but there are always, it seems like there's always something open on the city website. Also boards and commissions, we have ours. Of course, we'd love to have you on the Human Rights Commission, but we won't discourage you from other commissions if that's where your interest is. And I think we have, I don't know, did Adrian talk about how many we have? We have a lot of different boards and commissions, and they get into some really technical areas. We need people who have backgrounds in finance, backgrounds in construction, electrical, plumbing, all of those kinds of things are boards that we have, transportation. And you can also join or even begin your own neighborhood association. Right now, the person who was in charge of that has retired, so we're in between filling that position. But there's still some information out there on the website about existing neighborhood associations and how you might get started with one. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Awesome. That was fantastic. And Kathy, I don't know if you can see in the chat box right there, I was just kind of dropping a little something, just because I love how passionate that you spoke, especially about where you live, the B branch and everything else like that. So what questions do you all have?
Somewhat, thank you for the encouragement. Right now with 3 young kiddos, I have my hands full, but Leslie Note from Parks and Rec is like my spirit animal. I know she's not an animal, she's a person. But anyway, I did have a question, Kelly. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, is her name Kelly? Did I say it correctly? Okay, sorry, I just got tablets going to keep them occupied while my husband was dinner. So I was just interested in the Dubuque Community Police Relations Committee. So you said it was originally created in like the late 90s, and then it was updated in 2016, but there wasn't that much of a difference. What is the difference now?
So the biggest difference, one piece was they simply wanted to update it just because it hadn't been reviewed in so long. So a lot of it was just having conversations, making sure we were all on the same page about what we thought that the memorandum of agreement meant, right? Because it has been there for years and years. There's been changes in leadership and that sort of thing. The only significant change was it's called the Dubuque Police Relations Committee, and it was originally designed solely for police complaints. We did amend it so that now they will also hear complaints against any city department. So if somebody came in and they had a complaint against the housing department or, the public works department, they could bring that to us, and it can go to that committee now.
Sorry, I hope that link is clean. The other one that I found was just like really huge. So hopefully that takes you directly where you're looking for. Awesome
And
question.
I see,
Mhm.
is it true that Nick Anderson is one of the participants here?
We have been blessed with the opportunity of not only having Nick there, but he was also on the billboard. Ain't that right, Nick?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Nick's mother was just elected vice chair of the Human Rights Commission.
Whoop, whoop.
So yeah.
Starting to see a theme here.
Right?
Awesome, awesome. Anybody have any other questions? All right. With that being said, thank you so much, Kelly.